Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now look at this and tell me what you see. I'll give you a few moments. If you said, "Why, Stephen, that is a once top of the range EVGA Hybrid GTX 980Ti graphics card," then I'm afraid to say that, like me, you have been duped. I should have suspected something when this card arrived in a Zotac box and offered reference clock speeds, but I just thought that maybe the BIOS had been flashed for one reason or another. It was only when I removed the painted backplate that my speculation was confirmed. This is in fact a Zotac GPU in disguise. It's a forgery. Now I actually think this is really cool. Someone at some point in the last half decade has thought, you know what, I'm not paying for a better model, I'll make one myself, and then proceeded to buy the 120mm radiator and shroud kit that just so happens to work just fine with this version of the 980 Ti 2. Whoever you are, I think you've done a great job. Zotac and EVGA might object, but it's a thumbs up from me, especially as this was still the cheapest 980 Ti I could find anywhere on the internet. Because of the liquid cooler, we can actually push this card beyond the speeds of the EVGA Hybrid one by increasing the clock speed and memory frequency in MSI Afterburner. Back in 2015, this thing was capable of pushing out high frame rates at high resolutions, with GTA 5 being playable at 4K with over 60 FPS, most of the time anyway. What's more, the temperatures stay really low, though the constant and audible hum from the unit would definitely be enough to put some people off. Grand Theft Auto 5 still holds up quite nicely in 2021, but what about newer games? The aforementioned overclock is as high as I could go today without certain titles crashing. Cyberpunk was one of them. With that said, the card's current settings are certainly good enough to allow for 60 frames per second with the medium preset. Crowd density was also set to medium and the resolution scaling is turned off, so it's a native 1920 by 1080 here. Again, the temperature gets up to around 50 degrees but doesn't exceed that by much. The same can be said as we make the switch to 1440p. I think the 6GB of VRAM is really what keeps the 980 Ti competitive in 2021, and it seems to me that if you want to buy an older flagship, the upcoming end of support for 600 and 700 series cards makes this one the most sensible choice. That said, if you're on a tighter budget, then anything from the NVIDIA 900 series is worth looking at going forward. Now usually I'm aware of how the alphabet works, but today it seems as though I wasn't when I decided to put Call of Duty as the second benchmark test. Perhaps I was being a bit too cautious here, but I went for medium settings with high anti-aliasing and high textures. We definitely could have gone higher because the average frame rate was sitting at just over 100, though if you intend to be as competitive as possible, which is always ideal in games like this, then you may even consider lower settings. Just know that whatever you choose, be it low, medium or possibly high, you'll see great results from Black Ops Cold War. Even 1440p with the same settings gave us a plus 60 FPS average, which I think goes to show that the 980 Ti is still very much a decent card if you manage your expectations in terms of the graphical settings that you select. I'd also like to take a moment to appreciate the i5-10400F, which is still doing a fine job as my daily processor. Days Gone is a must-play game for me. Opinions are mixed, but I find that this one is really enjoyable on both PC and consoles. It's very well optimised too and offers decent visuals at high settings, all while putting out decent frame rates with the 980 Ti in the system. This game also crashes with a higher overclock, so while we could potentially make the card a little faster in some games, here that just isn't the case. 1440p still gives us decent performance as well, though we are creeping up on that VRAM limit, and there are certainly a few drops below 60 FPS with these high settings. With that said, medium looks almost as good, and you'll be seeing at least 10 to 15 frames per second more in some areas, so there's that. That's the beauty of PC gaming, or the ugliness of PC gaming if you turn the settings down too low. Next up, we have what was possibly the most demanding PC release of the last few years, though a recent patch has certainly made it more accessible to a wider variety of gamers. Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 will run with close to 60 frames per second on average at 1080p, with the medium preset selected. Medium on PC is similar to how the newly launched Xbox Series S version looks, but in this case we are getting double the frame rate. If you have a Series console, I'd still very much recommend it though, it looks really good. With the fake 980Ti, or reference 980Ti hiding out inside the shell of a top tier 980Ti, the game not only looks brilliant but runs well, and the same can be said when we make the switch to 1440p. Although a closer to 30 FPS average should be expected now, especially near busier cities or airports, I'd still say that this is playable due to the slower paced nature of this title. Taking a relaxing flight over your hometown or a village across the other side of the world still feels great at 30 frames per second. 4K is probably a no-no for this card in most cases though. Red Dead Redemption 2 with Digital Foundry's Xbox One X equivalent settings looks and plays great at 1080p. It's been out on PC for a while, but it still sets a standard for graphical quality in open world games, and you don't have to max it out to admire the visual beauty. Obviously the card will struggle a bit more at 1440p, but the game is still very much playable and can be tweaked to hit 60 FPS with this resolution as well. The 980Ti is still holding up very nicely. Just like in Black Ops Cold War, I was probably being a bit overcautious in Resident Evil Village. I chose the high 1GB texture setting option, though I could have gone a bit higher, but the game still looks really good, so you might want to stick with similar settings to this anyway. Leaving a bit of breathing room also means that when intensive scenes cause the frame rate to drop, and believe me that does happen, you can be sure that things won't dip below 60 FPS, if you'd rather try and stay above that target. I'm sure a lot of you probably would, considering this is a first-person title. Once again, 1440p is playable as well, though keeping the same settings will mean that during the aforementioned and inevitable frame rate dips, you might see figures drop into the mid-50s. Now, it's no big deal to someone like me who's played on consoles for most of my life, but it's worth noting, nonetheless, for anyone who wants to keep things consistent. Lower settings are of course available as well, just like in any game. Overall, the 980Ti, whether it's a reference card or a reference card disguised as a higher clocked card, is still pretty good these days. It's not every day you find a card like this one that isn't quite what it seems, but with a little bit of overclocking, it ends up not mattering anyway, and this was still the cheapest 980Ti I could find at this point in time, at about £200. That's all for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. This was certainly an interesting find. I didn't actually notice that this wasn't a legit EVGA card till about halfway through writing this script, and then I had to go back and change everything. So yeah, it's been quite a lot of work, this one, but I hope you've enjoyed it nonetheless. If you did, leave a like on it down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you own a 980Ti in 2021, or better yet, you own a legit hybrid 980Ti in 2021. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next video.